Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics. Mark, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Brittany. It's good to be with you.
President Trump's second term is only 2 months in, and in that time, he has threatened, started, paused, and escalated trade wars with our partners worldwide. The markets and economists alike have indicated that they are not fans of this tariff whiplash. And earlier this week, you said that President Trump came into office this second time around with a rip-roaring economy, but the chance for recession now is high. So to start off the conversation, how did we get here in such a short amount of time? Is it because of his trade policy? Is it because of the tariffs?
In part, yeah. I think we're here because of economic policy and big changes in policy. The tariffs, I think you can even call it global trade war at this point because we're raising tariffs and other countries are retaliating. So that's a trade war. Is creating a lot of havoc. Of course, there's the Doge cuts to government jobs and funding. At least it looks quite haphazard, and that's creating a lot of angst and uncertainty, costing jobs. There's the immigration policy, the changes there, aggressive deportation. Still early days. I don't know that it's a big macroeconomic issue, at least so far, but it's starting to play a role. You've got all the things that are going on with regard to tax and spending policy, fiscal policy. Congress is working, both the House and the Senate, on a very large reconciliation bill. And of course, the Treasury debt limit battle will soon rev up again. Isn't on the radar screen yet, but it will be soon. So there's a lot of policy balls in the air. In all those things are creating a lot of angst and uncertainty and making businesses, consumers, and obviously investors very nervous. And that is starting to have very significant implications for the economy. And that's why recession risks have risen so quickly.
And President Trump himself hasn't done much to quell economic fears. He said that we are in a period of transition. He also hasn't ruled out a recession. So from your estimate, how close are we to a recession?
Well, the way I try to articulate that is, what is the probability? And this is very subjective, based on all the things I'm reading and thinking about and all the data that I look at, but it's still very subjective. What is the probability that the economy will enter into a recession at some point in the coming year? And I'd say it's about 35%. And I just saw another survey of economists, and it feels like that's roughly the consensus. But just to give you context, kind of in a typical well-functioning economy, the probability would be closer to 15%, because we have a recession once every 6, 7, 8 years. So you do the arithmetic, that's about 15%. That's the unconditional probability of recession. So 35%, it's less than 50, which is really good, but it's uncomfortably. Let's put it this way: it's uncomfortably high, and it's rising. It's moving in the wrong direction.
And then I guess, how do we right that ship here? Because no one wants to hear, especially those who lived through the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. No one wants to go through a recession again. How do you steer the ship back? Because from what you're saying, there's a lot of policy balls in the air. Is this a Trump-inflicted recession?
Well, it's really easy to get this back on the rails, and that is end the uncertainty, end the global trade war. Be much more judicious and circumspect with regard to the kind of efforts to, the Doge efforts to address costs and fraud and other issues within the federal government. So you take a step back, be more cautious, pull back on the trade war. I think the economy gets its footing very quickly. Now, with each passing day, I say that with less confidence, because confidence is eroding, sentiment is very fragile, and it feels like that's becoming more the case with each passing day. So if anything else comes along, any other policy effort or anything else that we're just not anticipating, could very well push the collective psyche over the edge, and we go into recession. Brittany, at the end of the day, a recession is a loss of faith. Consumers lose faith that they're going to be able to hold on to their job. businesses, they lose faith that they're going to be able to sell what it is they produce, and you get into this kind of self-reinforcing negative cycle. We're not there yet, but it feels like we're right on the edge of that happening. And so, but I think if the president kind of figures out a way to pivot and we can declare victory and we move on here and end the trade war, we should be okay.
Does it look like he's going to do that? Because I've had a lot of people here talking about the tariffs. No one has been a fan of them. Economists, politicians, everyone in between. Does it look like President Trump is going to listen to this guidance of, hey, the markets don't like this. We could be headed to a recession. The economy was, as you said, rip-roaring 2 months ago. Does it look like we're going to change course at all?
Not at the moment, but if you go back to President Trump's first term, he engaged in a trade war, not on the scale that we're talking about here. It was, just to give context, right now there's tariffs, higher tariffs on about $800 billion worth of imported goods coming into the country, and that's going to rise on April 2nd in all likelihood when we go to reciprocal tariffs. Back in 2018-19, at the peak, the tariffs were on $350-400 billion of product, mostly coming from China. So the scales are very different. But if you go back to that previous episode, when the economy did start to struggle under the weight of the trade war, manufacturing was going into recession, the farmers were getting creamed. In fact, President Trump had to cut checks to the farmers to compensate for the lost sales of their agricultural products to China. He pivoted. He found a way to cut a deal with the Chinese. He declared victory, and the trade war by the end of 2019 was fading away. So that if that's your case study, then it's not unreasonable to think that that's what's going to happen here. But I say that with very low level of confidence, and with each passing day, less confidence, because the damage is starting to mount, and he's speaking about, he and the administration are speaking very differently this time than in his first term. Talking about the need for paying now for gain later, or look, there'd be some disturbance. Even you said, I can't rule out a recession. Those are the kinds of things that, I think is probably adding to the angst, because it's certainly making me nervous that, he isn't going to pull back on the trade war or some of these other policies that are doing damage.
And hearing the president say we're not necessarily, a recession's not out of the realm of possibility. Hearing you say that too, hearing you say, hey, I'm nervous. Hey, we are uncomfortably close to a potential recession. As an economist, what do you think is missing from this conversation when you think about President Trump's economic policy, when you're looking at tariffs, when you're thinking how we're inching closer and closer to a recession? What's missing here?
Well, it would be really nice if we all got a sense of what's the motivation, behind the trade war. What are we doing here and why? I mean, is it about the trade deficit? But the trade deficit really isn't playing much of a role in terms of economic growth. Is it trying to keep and attract businesses here? But what business person in their right mind would invest here given the uncertainty around these tariffs? I mean, they're here today, they could be gone tomorrow with the stroke of a pen. Is it about striking specific deals with specific countries over who knows what, fentanyl or immigration or USMCA, or is it about revenue? Is it about raising tariff revenue? What's going on? What's the end game? So to get a better sense of that, so they can have a real fulsome discussion around whether the trade war actually will achieve those goals. But I don't think anyone really has a sense of, what's the motivation, what's driving all this. And I think it'd go a long way to help if we kind of understood that. Now, I suppose the other side of it would say, well, this uncertainty is a feature, not a bug, I guess. But we'll see. I mean, this is an empirical question. We're going to find out pretty soon, whether the trade war is going to work or not.
And I think that's a really interesting point. And just a few hours ago, I was speaking with a congressman in Kentucky, and he said because of these tariffs, the bourbon industry in Kentucky is going to be absolutely slammed by this. And he said, I don't see a reason for these tariffs. There's not one clear definition of why we're doing this. President Trump has said for the tariffs, it's everything from fighting fentanyl, fighting an immigration crisis, putting America first, getting America back on its feet in terms of manufacturing. If there was a clear goal of we're doing the tariffs because of this, does that ever make sense as an economist? Does that ever work?
Well, I'm hard pressed to figure out when. I can't tell you. I mean, put 100 economists in a room, ask them the question: Are broad-based tariffs good policy, bad policy? You can work on the question. You'll get 99 of them saying it's a bad idea. You'll find one that probably says it's okay, maybe it's good. I don't know who that person would be, but I'm sure you could find them. But that's how, economists debate everything, right? We argue over everything. You can find economists on either side of almost an economic issue, not on tariffs, not on broad-based tariffs. That's pretty uniformly the case because history is very clear here. We know what's going to happen. I think hopefully we find a way to get beyond this without it doing too much damage.
I think my last question for you is April 2nd. That's been touted as the big day in terms of reciprocal tariffs from the Trump administration. Between now and then and on April 2nd, in 2 weeks from now, what specifically are you looking out for next?
Well, is it actually going to be April 2nd, Brittany? I'm not sure. We'll see.
I do think that's the first big question. Yes, will it actually be April 2nd?
I don't know.
But let's say it is.
I guess that's the question. Yeah. Well, if it as we're getting closer, first of all, I'm not sure anyone believes it's going to be April 2nd. So it may, the natural answer would be, well, as we get closer to April 2nd, investors are going to get nervous, stocks are going to fall, people are going to get more cautious, businesses are going to be hurt. I think that's the case, but I'm not so sure because no one really, is it really April 2nd? And what happens on April 2nd? So, we'll hear what the administration has to say between now and then because, it does feel like it's, if stock market starts going down, and this is not a bad thing per se, but the administration responds and says something to try to kind of take it back. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know if it's April 2nd or April 12th or May 3rd or June 5th.
And that's a good question because what does that do to the economy? This real uncertainty of you're saying, I don't know if this is April 2nd or this day or that day. What does this uncertainty do to the stock market and the economy as a whole?
I don't see any upside to it. All I see is downside. I mean, it's like a corrosive on the economy, on markets. I think people they're just going to sit on their hands, right? They may not start cutting, but they're not going to move. I mean, again, going back to the business person trying to make an investment decision, how can you make an investment decision? If you're in manufacturing or agriculture that are directly affected by the tariffs, what do you do with this? You don't know, which countries, which products, which companies, over what period of time. So you're frozen in place. So you go into a deep freeze. That's not a great place for an economy. If it's not moving forward and it's kind of frozen in place, it could get knocked over pretty easily by something else coming along. But I suppose if this does extend, if the uncertainty does extend into May, June, July, at some point people are going to say, hey, they're going to start cutting. They're going to start laying off workers. They're going to start cutting back on investment, and that's your recession. That's how you get to recession.
Well, there's certainly a lot to look out for between now and April 2nd, and if there is another date. Mark, Zandi, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your perspective here. You are welcome back anytime.
Oh, you're very kind. I appreciate that. Hopefully next time I'll have clearer answers. We've got problems that aren't clear at all. So.